My name is Rebecca Shockley. I am the Global Research Leader for Technology and Data from the IBM Institute for Business Value. I'm going to talk to you today about what it takes to create value from data and analytics. However, the presentation that I sent them in March I think is really boring. So unless anyone objects, I'm going to give you the same slides with a few more that I think make it much more interesting. Does anybody object? Okay. Let's go for interesting. The other conundrum is there are past slides, right? They only sent them to me in PDF, so I have to tell you if it, now it doesn't want to play my game. Please silence your cell phones. And now we're going to switch to the deck. So, what does it take to create value from data and analytics? This is something that the IBM Institute for Business Value, sorry, I keep thinking it. I just got off a 2-week European tour. I've done so many decks, I can't even remember which one's which. So, let's take that from the top. What does it take to create value from data and analytics? And why do big data and analytics matter today in the marketplace? Basically, we're living in a hyper-connected world. I think most of you are aware of that. But there are very few conversations that you can start today about society, about business, about individuals that doesn't somehow come back to or begin with technology. The hyper-connectivity that we're experiencing today has grown incrementally in the has just exploded in the last 5 years. And what we're seeing is that everyone around the globe is rapidly becoming connected, even in areas where you wouldn't necessarily think about the connectivity. For example, it's been a huge boom in developing areas who were unable to have landlines run out across the plains. And they're now able to use cell phone technology and are much better connected in places like rural Africa, rural South America, than they ever have been in the past. And we just expect this to keep growing. So I think most of you are probably comfortable with the thought of big data, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. When we talk about data, big data, typically folks focus on 3 things, which is the volume. As you know, the volume of data has grown exponentially in the last few years. Think about just your personal life and how much you've moved from a paper-based life to a digital-based life. So 5 years ago, you probably got the phone bill in the mail. It had the long list of everybody that you'd called, and you kind of went through it. Okay, maybe 10 years ago. And then you wrote out a check. You put the check back in the mail, and it went off, and the telephone company got it. If you're like me, most of you do that entire transaction digitally. You can look at the phone calls if you really want to in real time. You know exactly who you've called, and all of that information is now digitized. Amplify that to the other 7 billion people in the world, and you start to get a sense of where this volume of data is coming from. But it's not just that the volume of normal, standardized data has changed. And when we're talking about standardized data, we're talking about data that can typically fit in an Excel spreadsheet. So it fits in rows and columns, and that's how the data software, computer programs, hardware, all of that used to deal with it, right? Rows and columns. Now we have a much larger variety of data as well. So we've got things like videos that you want to analyze. We've got sensor data that comes in that's not particularly structured. You've got just a much wider variety of data types than just a TXT file, right? And so we want to be able to analyze this data as well. That's the second thing that's changed. The third thing that's changed is the velocity of data. And I'm not just talking about streaming data, although that's really part of what has spurred this whole thing on. So being able to process data in what we would call near real time, because very few things happen in real time, but being able to look at that data as it's coming through and figure out the signals that you need to respond to rapidly rather than the noise that's just stuff going through the system. But the second part of velocity is also the speed at which we do business today. So in the past, we may have wanted to be able to look at data, well, we didn't want to, but we looked at business data in batches, whether that batch came overnight, whether it came once a week, whether it came once a month, some of it came once a quarter. That just would not work in today's business environment. So the velocity that we're talking about is not only being able to see streaming data as it's going in near real time, but actually being able to analyze data and draw out those meaningful insights at a pace that can keep pace with today's business environment. So when we talk about big data, IBM likes to add a third or a fourth V. Everybody adds another V. It's clever and creative. Ours is veracity, because when you start dealing with much larger volumes of data, particularly, and wanting to look at it at a much greater velocity than in the past, you have to start considering the veracity of the data as well. So in the past, if you were making supply chain or logistic kind of decisions, and they could be impacted by the weather, you might think twice about locating a logistics center in Florida because of the potential for hurricanes, for example. But when you're starting to make logistic decisions on where to route this truck from point A to point B and how most effectively to get it there, the weather tomorrow becomes much more important, and even the weather within the next hour can become much more important. However, weather is one of those data points that you will never, ever be able to precisely predict. If you think you can predict the weather, you can make a fortune, but weather is something that inherently is, at some level, imprecise. So when you're dealing with large volumes of data, those little bits of imprecision start to get amplified. And when you're dealing with data at a much greater velocity than you've potentially done it in the past, again, that veracity, that imprecision can get amplified in your ability to make decisions based on that data. The good news is veracity can be managed with mathematics just in the similar ways that the volume, velocity, and variety can. We just think it's the fourth V that you should be paying attention to in today's environment. The big secret about big data is there's no definition. There is no definition for big, which means what's big to me may be small to you and might be just crazy huge to someone else. So it's not any given threshold that makes something big data. It's not any particular speed because, as I said, velocity is not just about streaming, it's about getting the insights out and being able to use them more quickly. And it's not about this type of data versus that type of data. So when IBM talks about big data, we talk about big data as being something that can't be managed by traditional processes. Actually, it's managed, analyzed, captured, intake, the whole 9 yards, right? From end to end, it can't be done in your traditional BI system because it's either too big, too fast, or too weird to go in the traditional ways. So that's why we have to start thinking about how to adapt in order to be able to utilize the data that exists today. And it makes a huge difference. As I said, I work for the IBM Institute for Business Value, which in this particular deck comes at the end. We're a business think tank inside of IBM, and what I do is primary research on market trends within the market. My area of specialty happens to be analytics, and when we were looking at analytics within the last, which study is this from, in 2012, we were looking at big data. We found that organizations that were already using big data were 2,300% more likely to report that they were outpacing their competitors in their markets and industries. So it can have a substantial effect on your ability to create a competitive advantage from information. When we look at the characteristics that organizations who are really utilizing big data well have, they are much more likely to make data accessible. They're much more likely to be able to draw insights out of that data, and they're much more likely to be able to translate those insights into actions. Because the third step is the key, right? Having the data, it's nice, doesn't do you any good. Data is inert, basically, until you take the insights that you can extract out of it and actually act upon them. Do something with them. And the thing that you want to do with big data and analytics is one of two things. You either want to impact behaviors, change behaviors, or impact the bottom line, whether that's increase revenues or decrease costs. So increase revenues, decrease costs, or change behaviors, that's what you're doing with information and analytics. If you aren't doing those three things, it's really just a nice exercise. We'll get back to change behaviors because most people think that that's just external, but I'll tell you a secret. It's also you want to change behaviors inside your organization as well. So, what does it take to create value from information and analytics? Last year we did an enormous survey of about 1,000 respondents. I really liked these people a lot because I can't imagine how long it took most of them to take this survey. But we wanted to cover every possible capability that we could think of that applies to information and analytics and understand which one of them really impact value. And we found 9 sets of capabilities that impact value the most. And then we did some additional analysis on that data, pitting those 9 against one another to see what kind of impact each set of capabilities, which we call levers, has had on analytics. And we found out that there are sets of capabilities that impact the ability to create value from information and analytics in 3 ways. So the first way at the top is the enable levers. And these are the ones that are basically table stakes. You're not going to start creating value from information and analytics if you don't have these in today's marketplace. The first one is source of value, and that means that you have a very clear sense of what it is you're trying to do with the data. What business outcome do you want to achieve with your analytic activities? And then, here's the tricky part, making sure that your investments actually align to those outcomes. It was shocking. The leaders, another one, so the leaders, all of this is based on the top basically 20%, it's actually 19% of our data pool who are creating the most value from information and analytics, and we looked at what distinguished them from everyone else. So when we looked at the leaders, there was great alignment between a very clear definition of what business outcomes they wanted to achieve and where their investments were going. When we look at other organizations, there's a misalignment there. The second one is measurement. You can't actually claim to have created value from information and analytics if you can't measure it. And the third one is the platform. And in today's marketplace, what we found is that those who aren't using big data and analytics, who don't have the hardware and the software integrated to be able to deal with volume, velocity, and the variety of the data, are going to really have a difficult time creating value that moves them beyond their competitors. The second level, and personally I think this is the most interesting level, the second level, because it's weird, the second level is the drive level. And the interesting thing about the drive level is that these levers will basically constrain your ability to create value from information and analytics. They create a negative drag on the organization. And despite the fact that data is on this list, they have very little to do with what most people traditionally think creates value from information and analytics. The first one is culture. And culture means that you have the data available and accessible within your organization to create value from it. The second piece about culture is that you've got a culture that's willing to make decisions based on information and analytics. And this is where we get back to changing behaviors. When we're talking about culture and you're asking someone to change the way they normally do their job by incorporating business analytics into it. You're now asking them to rely enough on that data to stake their reputation on it. That is a huge cultural shift and probably the most significant hurdle that we run into in creating value from information and analytics. So, when we looked at what it took to create that confidence enough to stake my reputation on making a decision based on this information, it's very closely tied to the next one, which is data. And when we looked at data, what we found was that there was no particular type of data that was creating outsized value for these leaders. It had nothing to do about the types of data they were collecting. It had everything to do with how they treated the data they already had, which means it was well governed. They had standards that applied across all of their data. They had privacy in place, they had security in place, and the privacy, security, and standardization of that data within the organization was the number one thing that the folks said gave them enough confidence to actually make a decision on the data. That was secondary to the leader finding. But so you can start to see how these things are all connected. I'm not going to make a decision if I don't trust the data. I'm not going to trust the data unless it's well secured, right? And that level of security was the thing that distinguished them. The third thing in the drive, and remember, these are the ones that are going to drag you backwards. The third thing in the drive level is trust. And this one was our big surprise. Like I said, it was a very large survey, and some of our questions were a little whimsical. And so we looked at how much people trusted one another within the organization. And it turns out that interpersonal trust between the person who's asking to use your data, the person who's giving you the data, the person who wants you to make this decision based on this data, every variation of sharing flavor that you can come up with was significant. So it's not just having data that you can trust, it's having data that you can trust and you know where it came from, who it came from, what's been done to it. And the same went when they were being asked to share data. I'm sure many of you, I'm sure none of you actually have ever dealt with the politics of trying to get someone to share their data with everybody else in the enterprise. And it turned out that that trust has a significant impact on that willingness to share, whether you're on the receiving or the giving side. If I don't believe that we're all working for the same common good, and I don't know what you're going to do with my data, I'm not really interested in giving it to you. So trust turned out to be one of the most significant levers that we found, and it was our one biggest surprise, most likely. So now you can see how culture, data, and trust all kind of fit together, and without those three, it's going to be really difficult to create value from information and analytics. The last lever, it's all L's. The last level, actually, that we found were the Amplify. And these are the levers that really boost your ability to create value from information and analytics. I'm sure most of you have heard about sponsorship, having executive support, What we found, though, is that it's not really just that having that top-down edict, mandate from the top, blah, blah, blah. It really had, in the sense of value creation, the big aha was the collaboration between the executives at the next level down, which of course connects back to trust. So you've got a CEO that says, we are going to become a data-driven organization. Yes! It only really works if the next level down believes him and agrees to cooperate with one another. And again, these are kind of connected across the bottom layer. So this collaboration at the senior management level is what was critical in sponsorship. Not to say that the top-down support wasn't also important, but it was the collaboration that we saw there. That collaboration not only connects back to being able to share data across the enterprise and create that single source of truth, but it works across the bottom layer as well. When we look at funding, turns out funding and a rigorously applied metrics-based, so you can compare one project to the other project on a level playing field, is a critically important way to get more value out of your analytic investments. Again, tied somewhat back to measurement and source of value to make sure that the projects that you're putting into place actually align with the business outcomes you want to achieve, and you can measure the results of them. But having that funding process that was rigorously based on metrics and also brought funding, pools of funding together from across the organization, because there are very few of these big data technologies, hardware, software instances that your organization is going to need to invest in to move to the next level, which may, and we found the ROI is quite often less than 12 months on these, rarely is one business unit going to be able to fund them. And it's that collaboration at that senior management level that enables them to create pools of funding, not only for hardware and software, but for resources. There are going to be certain resources that your organization may want to invest in, like data scientists, the sexiest, hottest nerds on the earth, and they don't come cheap. And moreover, if they get bored, they leave really quickly. So you better be able to share them around multiple projects. And if I'm paying for my really expensive nerd, I want you to help me pay for him, and then he can go work on your projects too. So being able to pool those funds together was a critical part of being able to create value. The last piece was expertise. And not to say that expertise is the least, it's clearly on the ability to amplify layer. What we didn't find was that there was a particular role, like the data scientist, who made the biggest difference. What made the biggest difference, quite frankly, were organizations, the willingness of the organization to invest in training and upskilling the people that already were within the organization. So the ability for them to share knowledge across the organization, the ability for them to basically create these pools of knowledge, and the ability for analysts across the organization to work together, as well as providing the training to get them skilled up. So when we talk, you'll hear a lot about the need for specific types of skills, and while you do need those skills, what we would really recommend is building them from within. As I said, it was an incredibly large survey, and we found, anecdotally, it's not in the study, which you can all download for free, the people who have, so like data scientists, we're seeing a lot of churn and burn. They come into an organization, they stay 18 to 24 months, and they move on because they know there's money to be made out there. What we found is that in leader organizations, they're having much greater success. In addition, well, the expertise part of train your people came through the data. Then we went out and talked to them, and they're having much more success training up people who are already loyal to their organization. Moreover, that really helps you get at the one skill that is most critically short in almost every organization we surveyed, which is someone who can take the analytics, the insights, and understand what in the world to do with them because they understand the business well enough. Being able to bring analytics knowledge and the knowledge of how your business works and what's really going to impact it together was the most critical skill that everybody wants and nobody has. So if you take someone who already understands your business and start to upskill them, hopefully they have an aptitude or at least an interest in mathematics, upskill them, then they already understand what makes your organization tick, and they're much more likely to make decisions about how to take action on the insights that create an impact than someone who's just looking at data and reading the data field labels. So these are the 9 levers. And let's see where we are on time, except for my timer went away. Halfway. Wow. Okay. So I'll go a little faster. I thought instead of just walking you through data graphs that show all of these things or just bullet points, I'd tell you a little story about Westfield Insurance. Westfield Insurance is a 160-year-old company in the very, very traditional state of Ohio, in the very, very traditional industry of insurance, in a very small town, which, if any of you have seen Stepford Wives, it kind of looks like that. It is a gorgeous campus. It's beautiful. And the people are crazy Midwestern nice. So the company was doing really, really well. But they had a very smart CEO who is now their CIO, who is now their CEO, as well as the CEO at the time, that said, we're very smart and things are going well, but we can sense that things are changing in the market. They could start to see all of this digitization coming. They had the feeling that what was going to make the difference for them was being able to really understand their customers better. So they embarked upon a journey. We'll go back. They embarked upon this journey. I think they started in about 2007. I spent 2008 with them, and they have since moved forward. But I thought I'd tell you about their story because, unbeknownst to them, they actually moved through each one of these levers in that process. So we're going to start with the enable levers. Remember, these are table stakes. You have to have them to get going. This is mostly what I talked about in between. It's in the boring deck that you can download for the slide, but it kind of goes through the key points for each one of the levers. The first one we talked about, align investments to value outcomes. 75% of organizations are now focused on revenue opportunities as opposed to cost containment. That's a dramatic difference from when we were looking at that in 2009. And the recession was going on and everybody was freaking out. Everybody's focused on growth again. So if you're not focused on your growth and you're still focused on cost containment, your organization's a little behind the curve. They want to focus on accelerating the speed of analytics. Like I said, it's not so much that the data is just streaming, but we want to get those insights extracted out of the data faster so we can act on them. And finally, leaders are using the data that they have as a source for new innovative ideas, which, if I don't run out of time, we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So the second part is measure. Define your measurements in advance, benchmark, measure, implement, measure again. Platform, you have to be using predictive analytics. Most of the leaders are using prescriptive analytics at this point, and now we've got people starting to implement cognitive analytics, and if you haven't read about cognitive, it's Watson in a box, so happy to talk about that later or send you some more information. But if you aren't doing predictive, again, you're behind the curve. They are analyzing a variety of data, have to be able to handle big data, and pretty much can analyze streaming data at the leader level. So let's talk about what Westfield did. As I said, Westfield was very clear that their future success was going to depend upon a better understanding of who their customers were and what was happening within their business. They were very clear about it. They knew exactly what outcomes they wanted to achieve. So the first thing they did was start looking at data that would go and look at the performance of the independent agents who sold their products. They're not captive agents, if you know anything about insurance. They're independent agents. And they really didn't have any concept of who these people were really, right? They just knew them. They'd had business relationships with them. So they did something that was very smart. They benchmarked, baselined the performance of their agents, and then went through the first phase of the data transformation and focused all of their investments on making sure that it was to help them understand agents better. The thing that I say is really smart here, it kind of ties to the next one, which is the platform, is that they started with data they already understood, added tools and hardware, software that they did not understand. So they were learning tools while they were working with data they knew, Then, as they understood the tools in phase 2, they brought in customer data, which they didn't understand, but they already understood the tools. So you see where I'm going here? In our 2012 study, when we looked at what data folks were analyzing first with their big data activities, turns out they were analyzing data that already existed within their organization. It's easier to learn one thing at a time, so learn either new hardware, software, or new data. Trying to learn new hardware, software, and data all at the same time, it's really, really overwhelming to your people that you're asking to do that. Moreover, Westfield decided that this was not an incremental change. This was a change within the business. They knew, because they'd been living this for 160 years, they knew they couldn't do what they wanted to do with the tools they had at the time. And so they went big, and they expected the entire enterprise to use the new tools and the new processes. So they moved the entire platform from basic BI to what I'd call middle BI, and now they're moving into big data. So it's kind of a step-by-step process there. But again, as Heidi says, it was an enterprise effort. This wasn't a siloed effort, and we've seen those be successful, but that's a whole different study, and I can talk about that with you if you want to know. So that's the basics of Enable. Let's talk about the drive levers. Again, with drive levers, we've got a culture that makes sure you've got the data you need. They distribute it out across the organization, and they make a majority of their decisions based on data. Leaders in the trust, they create that confidence with governance and security in the data. So they trust the data they have, they adopt really rigid privacy and security policies, and they implement a strong governance infrastructure. Word to the wise, your governance infrastructure is more than just data stewardship, and it should be business driven. Business leaders should be the one making business decisions about why and what we're doing with the data. Because if it's not attached to a business outcome, why are you doing it? And the third part is trust. This is trust between people. And in order to create trust between people, you have to know them. The one thing I didn't tell you about trust is that when we looked at, we looked at business exec to business exec to IT exec, everything that sounded personalized, trust was way up. As soon as you said business to IT and it was depersonalized, trust fell through the floor. So again, it's interpersonal trust. It's building a relationship with people. It's walking around and talking to them. It's introducing yourself as their data analyst or their business analyst or their business exec, or the person who wants to use their data or the person who wants to get data from them. It's person to person. I don't care how much I'm from IBM and we do computers and this is all about technology. It's person to person. You can't just shut them out. So what did Westfield do? In the culture, they made it very clear that they were now expecting people to make decisions based on data, and they knew that to do that, they had to make the data that everybody had been looking for readily available and accessible. So they went around and very pointedly asked them, what data will make you understand, and we'll talk about phase 1, the agents better? What data is it that you need to make better decisions about how to work with these agents? We did it again with customer. We did it again when they went into products, blah, 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 blah. But it's making sure that people have access and can readily get to the data that they need to make a particular decision, rather than telling them to make a decision based on data and then not giving them the data to make the decision upon. The second step the next part is about data, and the first thing that Westfield did was put in an organization, business-driven, that was to oversee the business intelligence, analytics, and governance. It was a business-driven process that said, this is the business outcome we want to start with, these are the projects that we think will get us there. Clearly, IT was involved. Clearly, the CIO was the guy sitting at the head of the table at that point to help them through the process, but these were decisions that were based on business decisions, and they had a business governance at the senior level, management level, and then they had a center of competency that helped them write the rules and put the policies in place and did the day-to-day work. But again, it wasn't left as an open all, free-for-all. They created the Analytics Resource Center, which they called ARC. I thought that was clever. And this ARC really got them through the process to make sure that people understood the governance that they were putting in place and why. And it made them much more comfortable about using the data. And finally, trust. Again, it's Ohio, it's insurance. You're asking them to do their business differently, and they've been doing just fine. So the level of trust needed to help explain, the level of trust needed was really high. So they made a very big point to invest a lot of time and a lot of effort into change management. Before they ever asked people to start changing anything about the way that they were working, they spent a lot of time explaining to them what was happening in the market, what was happening with their customers, why this was the direction the company needed to go, why it made sense for Westfield to do these changes. And these were, they did it at a large town hall meeting size, they did it in small departmental meetings where people could ask more questions. You have to make people comfortable, and the only way that people gain a lot of confidence is in those face-to-face interactions. So then finally, Amplify. The sponsorship, as we said, creating that common vision that helps everyone across the organization understand why we're doing this and enabling them to work together, to collaborate to do it, was the critical success factor there. So when we look at leaders, they advocate for the use of business in analytics, they define an enterprise-wide strategy, and then they implement the enterprise-level standards and direction to really help them move forward. When we're talking about funding, again, we're talking about creating value from a very rigorous, metrics-driven process. And they require quantifiable, not just qualitative, quantifiable business results. And moreover, they go back and they measure it later to see how well the forecasts were, how well those predictions were, and how they can improve those forecasts next time. And finally, they pool their funding together across lines of business because they are all on the same page, because they share this common vision. They pool their funding together to implement these projects that tend to be larger than any one line of business can fund on their own, as well as the resources that are going to be shared across the enterprise. And finally, leaders on the expertise really make sure that they're sharing subject matter experts and they're creating opportunities for analysts across the organization to share ideas, to talk about what they're doing with one another, so that you're not reinventing the wheel in 6 different departments, all trying to achieve the same thing with different data sets. And they formalize the career path of analytics. And it's really something that you should all be thinking about, because analytics is definitely one of the hottest jobs in the market. And being able to do analytics, whether you're talking about the data management side or the analytics side, and there are 2 sides, most people keep focusing just on analytics. By formalizing the career path for these people, it's an outward statement that you consider them important and you're willing to invest in their professional development. And it's that investment in the professional development that makes a critical difference. And if you've worked with very many data miners, they like to feel important and they don't like to work alone. So making sure that you're giving them a formalized career path, ongoing training, and a sense of community where they can share their ideas, you can keep them in-house. This is Ed. I like Ed. He's really a nice guy. He's as nice as he looks. Ed was the guy who said, we've got to start doing things differently. And moreover, and at the time, he wasn't the CEO, he was the CIO. And moreover, he went to each one of the line of business leaders and said, we have to do things differently, and here's why. And here's how we can do it, and here's why it will be good for Westfield. And he spent a lot of time doing that at the senior level to create that sense of collaboration and that common vision for the organization before they even moved it further out into the organization. The funding process was very rigorous. They built a template, and people were like, oh, but my project's special, and I don't know how to forecast it. And Ed was like, I don't care. Here's your template. It's metrics driven. Figure it out. Then you'll get funding. So, you know, it didn't hurt that his pal in all of this was the chief actuary. Don't mess with actuaries. They will find a way to make numbers out of everything. So, metrics driven, rigorous process. And then finally, they really took seriously the fact that this was going to be a data-driven organization. All of their key employees, all of their employees are now expected to have a certain level of analytic aptitude, and it's now part of the job requirement and the performance expectations on their senior management. And I got to write the sentence that they put into their overarching mission statement of, we are a data-driven organization. Can't even remember what it said now, but it was nice. So they put it into their values, they put it into their missions, they put it into their performance evaluations. They said it was embedded into their organization at the personal level, right? And they made sure that they were giving them the training they needed. They used a lot of different types of activities to do it. Some of it was webinars for distance learning for their claims agents that were all over the country. They went out, they talked to people. All different ways that people learn, they tried to hit them all to make sure that people were comfortable with the process and learning the skills they needed to learn. Now, Westfield is a privately held company, so they don't give us data, monetary data. But at the end of phase one, they had 95% user satisfaction. They thought that they had really improved their ability to evaluate the agents. 40% at this point, and I know it's higher now, had really started to use analytics on a daily basis. And they really feel strongly that they're much better able to monitor and manage their 1,200 agents from across the organization. Okay. We're not going to quite get to time for innovation, so because it's 12 o'clock. So why don't I pause here? Wait, I want to show you one other slide though real quick. Here's the wrap-up slide for this part. 3 big takeaways, recommendations, instill a sense of purpose. Make sure that everybody understands why you want to become a data-driven organization. Create the common agenda. Make sure that your investments are aligning to the outcomes you want to achieve. That was just surprising to me how many people weren't doing that. And have a funding structure that really supports pooling that data together. Second, architect for the future. Big data is not going away. It's not going to get little again. It's just not. So make sure that you can manage the volume, velocity, and variety of data. Make sure that your data management practices are strong enough to instill confidence. If they don't have confidence, they're not going to make a decision based on the data. And finally, make sure that you're architecting in a way that gives you that flexibility that you need to move forward. It's not that we want to redo the spaghetti warehouse of 10 years ago in a new environment. Let's make sure that we're creating a system that works for the future. And finally, enable people to act on the data. Give them the data they need. Make sure that you can define how and why and what you're doing with this data. And help them create the level of trust within the organization to make sure that they've got the confidence to make decisions based on this data. As I kind of threw in the middle because it wasn't at the beginning of the slide, I work for the IBM Institute for Business Value. We're a business think tank inside of IBM. A couple of things about our data. I cover business analytics and optimization, data and technology. The name changes all the time. We also cover C-suite studies, so we go out and interview face-to-face thousands of CEOs, CIOs, CMOs, blah, 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 and they look at those guys. And then we also have folks who are focused on very deep industry-specific topics. So if you're in telecommunications or retail or manufacturing, all of those we've got you covered. All of our research is primary. We do a lot of primary research. We do some secondary. It's fact-based and it's free and it's product agnostic, so none of it's going to market IBM products to you. We're the only people in IBM that don't try and sell you anything. So download our stuff, read it for free, enjoy it, and I'll open it up for questions. Well, what? I know, but I thought we might need 15 minutes of questions, unless no one's going to have questions, and then we'll talk a minute about innovation. But he has one. Yes?
On your webpage right now, what is this called to download what you've got?
This particular study, the lever study, so when you go on the page, you're going to say, it's going to say what industry or category. I'm business analytics and optimization. And this is the last study over there. It's analytics, a blueprint for value. The one before it, analytics, the real world use of big data. It's because big data was such a big thing in 2012. Everybody was talking about it and nobody had facts, so we went out and got some. 2012 and 2013, you can also download the derivatives that are industry specific. So not just the levers, but the levers that retail is really good and really not good at. We always put it in the positive, right? So they're good at these. They have areas of improvement. So we tell you what those are in the 2013 study. We do the same for big data in 2012. The other ones are really for executives who need to come up to speed on this whole concept of becoming a data-driven organization. In 2011, we talked about competencies. Turns out they look a lot like the levers, but competencies. And in 2010, we talked about there's two paths. No, that was 2011. So they're well worth reading, I think, and they're all for free. Okay, next question. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to your emphasis on trust.
Yes.
As an analytics team within my organization, one of the things we are constantly grappling with is the concept of, in gaining trust with our business partners, are you aiming for the side of a barn or are you aiming for a dartboard? In other words, we spend an awful lot of time gaining trust by getting it down to the decimal 0.00001. And sometimes I wonder if directional is good enough, but in an effort to gain trust, you know, is it really worth spending that exponential amount of time getting it so that our number, even though it's maybe not over the same time period or the same numbers or whatever, matches the number that they have from the study 5 years ago. And in talking to other colleagues of mine, I feel that this is something that a lot of analytics teams at organizations grapple with. The barn door versus the dart.
So for most business executives, okay, so my short answer is get out of your desk, walk down to your business partner and introduce yourself and ask them. Because creating that face-to-face connection is going to help probably more than a few more decimal points. For most business executives, they want directional that they can count on, directional that they're confident in, right? Because we certainly don't want them to feel, and we certainly are not implying that their business acumen doesn't apply here. So they want something that will either help them support the decision they're making or give them pause and tell them that is not the good decision to make. So usually a very small barn door is good, not the size of a dartboard, but just a skinny person. But honestly, the best thing you can do is go walk over there, shake their hand, tell them who you are, ask them what they want, and get that interpersonal relationship started. And then that immediately will increase their trust in the data that you're creating. Okay. Yes, sir?
Hi. Thanks for the presentation. I was looking at the paper and it summarizes. No, you just Google the title. It's like the first entry up. So it's wicked easy. I was looking at the levers and I'm thinking, well, those are great levers, but those are actually great levers for a lot of different things. Like you could almost apply that to most. Maybe it can be found with that idea. So just as a counter, in your survey as you refine down, was there anything that came across that is specifically not useful or important in general for determining leaders in the analytics field? Anything that people may think would be a lever, but actually it turns out it just doesn't make a difference?
Yes, so we had some hypotheses that it was going to be particular types of data that they were collecting or particular hardware and software that they had, and those didn't turn out to be true. It just was that the hardware software skills needed to match the type of analytics that they were prepared to do at that point. So, we saw organizations that said they had geospatial tools, and they had no geospatial skills, right? So why did they invest in that? It makes no sense. As an example, we really expected to find some silver bullets in, you have to have, well, I didn't, but my geeky friends did. You have to have a high capacity warehouse, you have to have blah, 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 you have to have, whatever the latest, greatest Hadoop kind of thing is. And those didn't turn out to be the things that really mattered most in creating value. I don't think analytics is very different from a lot of other things in life, because it's all about making decisions, and most things in life are about making decisions. It's just, we also noticed that these could be applied in many situations. The one that doesn't work outside of analytics as much is the data one, about having strong governance, but take data off and you need a strong governance system for most anything you're doing. So yes, in a way, not so groundbreaking. In another way, why haven't you figured it out yet then? So, is there another question? Yes, ma'am.
What in your experience you found for mid-sized organizations is the effort that you put in for establishing the whole data governance part?
So for mid-sized organizations, now you will also know that for 2012 and 2013 we have mid-sized cuts for both of these two. Somehow I've become the mid-size advocate in the IBV. I don't know. For mid-sized organizations, it tends to be very centralized into specific individuals, but again, the same principles of having standardized data across the organization, making sure that customer means the same to everyone and everyone knows what it means. The principles don't change. The thing that changes with mid-market organizations tend to be that they are slightly lower on the curve as far as predictive analytics, but we see a lot that are moving rapidly that way. And I just did a big speech in Copenhagen to a bunch of mid-market people, and one of my big message points to them was, A, big data is not just for big companies, because there's no definition of big, right? And analytics is one way that mid-market organizations can really, in some ways, start to level the playing field, because with the changes in technology that are available, for example, cloud, mid-market organizations no longer have to invest in an entire room full of servers. You can rent the time, you can rent the space, there are different business models for that. But taking that, what before was a just insurmountable upfront cost away from the formula, has really given mid-market organizations a leg up in the situation that they didn't have before. So at this point, it's a lack of imagination in most mid-market organizations and fear. Those are the two things that are holding them back, because the tools are much more better designed to be used by business users. We're seeing a lot more tools come out that all the algorithms and all the scary math is behind the glass, so you don't have to know any of that. Which again starts to level the playing field. You don't have to for every application. Now, when you get really, really big and you want to do really, really complex things, then you're going to have a team of data scientists. But to get that competitive advantage, especially against other mid-market organizations, there's really nothing that should be holding them back. That wasn't actually directly to your question. It's just my little speech on mid-market. Okay, any other questions? No more questions? Do you want to hear a little bit about innovation? Yes. Okay. So innovation's the one I'm working on right now. And so when we talk about really, really making money out of data, innovation is really the key to data monetization. When we're talking about innovation, we're talking about doing things differently, creating new revenue streams, creating a different way of using your products and services than you're doing today. And what we found is that organizations that are using big data and analytics within their innovation process, so these are already the outperformers in their innovation process, those outperformers who are using big data and analytics, 36% more likely to be substantially outpacing their competitors. So they're outpacing the outperformers if they're using big data and analytics. So how do they do it? There's really two ways when we think about how to use big data and analytics to create additional value in the innovation cycle. The first one is that you use data to underpin your innovation. And by underpin, we mean you're using the insights from the data itself, which is how most people think about using data, right? When you think about innovation, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have all this data and I'm going to extract the insights out of it, and that's going to give me these innovative ideas. Mazda does it really well. They take all of the claims data they can get their hands on from around the globe, analyze the data to really start to find the patterns within their car that are creating, that could be improved through this claims data. And they then build in new safety features, new features within the car, things that can help them create a better car. So they're extracting those out. ConocoPhillips was very close to pulling out of its Arctic drilling. Some of you may have wanted them to. But the big problem was that the ice flows, the icebergs kept running into their drilling rigs, and that's very costly, and it's a little bit dangerous. It's a lot dangerous. So they started using massive amounts of big data, looking at weather patterns, water currents, ice flow patterns, and really started to understand how to map where the ice flows were moving from point A to point B, and it dramatically changed the risk involved in their drilling operations there. And then the city of Petersburg, we've got lots of cities examples here that we could have used, but we chose them. They opened up and made much more transparent the activities of the city as far as energy consumption, waste removal, recycling, all of those things, and created a two-way dialogue, both with their employees as well as with the citizens within their community, to look for new ideas and find new ways to create, to enable the city to be much more sustainable. So creating that two-way dialogue really changed the scene for them. The other way that you can use data and innovation is to instigate innovation itself. So in these scenarios, the data itself becomes the asset that you're selling. For Pocketsmith, for example, they did both sides of underpin and instigate. So Pocketsmith is a financial services application that for its customers, it says, you give us your data, and we will not just help you manage your money better, we'll help you forecast. So over time, we're going to learn your habits that you don't put in your budget, and we're going to help you forecast better for these financial needs that you may have for the future. So it becomes not just a financial management, but a financial forecasting tool for the individual consumer. The instigate part of the business model, in a way it's on the consumer side, but then in addition to that, they created an entirely new revenue stream or a separate revenue stream by taking the information that they were getting from the customers, anonymizing and aggregating it, and selling the insights that they could extract based on the behaviors of this customer pool set back out to small and medium-sized businesses particularly. And for those of you who are in smaller businesses, Pocketsmith has basically fewer than 25 employees. It has 8 core employees. They're based out of 2 very incredibly small cities in New Zealand. Fiserv is a larger company. They're basically the company that when you swipe your credit card in the United States, when you swipe your credit card, there's a lot of work that has to go on to get the merchant, the payment from the bank, from the credit, and all of the credit card company. They're the people that process that whole transaction in the middle for small and medium-sized banks. What they realized was that they had a lot of data coming through their system, and again, similar to Pocketsmith, realized that if they anonymized and aggregated that data, they could start to do analytics on either the customers of a particular bank or the customers of a particular demographic across these banks, and start to provide analytics back to the small and medium-sized businesses that was very similar to the analytics that Capital One or Bank of America can afford to have. Capital One has 260 data scientists on staff. That's not something a small or medium-sized bank is ever going to be able to do, and therefore start to get them the same kinds of analytics, or at least similar analytics, to start to level that playing field. Did you have a question?
Comment though, medium-sized businesses,
Mm-hmm.
if you're a large business and you don't have the data there, a medium-sized business can come in, get a strategy, and kill the large business. So I'm not sure that being a large business is any advantageous because the complexity and the partnering take away efficiency so much faster than you gain from having more people.
You just have to convince the small and medium-sized businesses of that.
Exactly.
Because it sounds, big data sounds big, and everything big sounds scary. Uber is the last example I have here. They basically reinvented the transportation market, both from a customer side and from a driver side, by creating a dynamic pricing model. So for the customer, when you call Uber and you say, I need a taxi, or I need transportation, because they aren't actually taxis, I need transportation, your price as a consumer is going to vary based on the number of drivers available and the current demand. So as a consumer, they're trying to change, as a company, they're trying to change your behavior and tell you to leave the bar an hour earlier, because everyone wants a driver at 2 a.m. and nobody wants one at 1. And for the driver, they're trying to convince them that they can get a higher fare if they are willing to work at these high demand peak hours. And they've kind of taken the whole taxi licensing out, which is kind of the chaos they're having in Houston. But anyway, so they changed that dynamic for both the buyer and the provider, and bringing them together, and are basically reinventing the transportation model around the globe. So you've already seen this one, you've seen that one. Those are all of my slides for today. Are there any more questions, or I think we're actually out of time now? Yep. Thank you.